Okay, good evening, everyone. I think we'll get started now. Thanks for joining us tonight. My name is Carter Dorsch, and I'm the Executive Director of the Kensington Conservancy. And with me here tonight is Corinne Wilkerson. She's our Land Stewardship Coordinator. And tonight we're going to tell you all about the Kensington Conservancy, our nature preserves, and what we do. So again, a few housekeeping notes. Please keep yourself muted and your video off throughout the presentation. And then we'll have an opportunity for questions at the end. If you think of any questions throughout the presentation that you don't want to forget, feel free to enter them into the chat. And I'm just going to share my screen here. Okay, and here we go again. My name's Carter, with me is Corinne, and we're going to tell you all about the Kensington Conservancy. So the Kensington Conservancy is called a type of land trust. Land trusts are nonprofit organizations which own and manage land. We're a conservation land trust. So what we do is we protect land and conservation easements for the purpose of limiting commercial development and preserving open space, natural areas, waterways, productive farms and forest. And we just want to protect the biodiversity of the area. There's a few different types of land trusts. The other one that I'm a little bit familiar with is land trusts for affordable housing. But our mission is acquiring land to protect it for ecological value. So a little bit of the history of the Kensington Conservancy. The idea began back in the 1990s when there was threat of development within the Deborah, Ontario area. And then rather than being reactive to threats like this, a group of people decided to be proactive. And it took a while, but the Kensington Conservancy became incorporated as a nonprofit organization in 2001. And then 5 years later became qualified as a registered charity in 2006. So in our area, we have a lot of American supporters as well. So we're also incorporated as a 501c3 in the United States. 501c3 is the equivalent of a registered charity here in Canada. So this allows us to take US donations as well as Canadian donations. So our mission, like all nonprofits, we have a mission and vision statement. The mission of the Kensington Conservancy is the establishment, development, maintenance, and management of nature reserves and programs in the St. Joseph Channel for the conservation and preservation of natural ecosystems. So how are we funded? A majority of our funds come from donations from the local community, you. We really appreciate everyone's support. You can be a member of the Kensington Conservancy for only $35 a year, and then we do raise additional funds on top of that. We do apply for government and private grants to help our operations, but usually these only cover specific projects and not our operating budget. So we really rely on the generosity of our local community to fund our staff, fund our office, and fund all the work that we do. So just some quick stats for you. We have just shy of 1,200 acres of protected property already. That's across 11 nature preserves and 2 conservation easements. I'm going to get into a little more detail about those a little bit later on. We have over 12,000 feet of shoreline that we've protected. We have portions of 2 provincially significant wetlands protected. Provincially significant wetlands are wetlands that have been evaluated by wetland experts and have been deemed to be of high significance, more significant than others. And we have recorded over 1,300 species of flora and fauna. Flora and fauna is fancy words for plants and wildlife. So that's exciting, but there's still many more out there left to discover on our nature preserves. And we have over 450 members and supporters of the Kensington Conservancy, which is growing every year. I think in 2020, we added about 50 new members. So that was great to see the community support growing. So when it comes to protecting land, we have a strategic approach. We want to look at the ecological value of a property, the community value of a property, the location value, and then of course, money is a big factor in all of this. So the ecological value, we look at things like wildlife habitat. If a property has a significant amount of wildlife habitat, then that's a strong indication that we should try to protect it. Any large pieces of undeveloped property will be likely home to hundreds or even thousands of species. Wetlands, I've already talked a little bit about wetlands, and I'm sure a lot of people here understand how important wetlands are to the ecosystems. They're natural filters. They help prevent flooding. They're home to a variety of wildlife. Shoreline, we want, to protect as much shoreline as possible. Shoreline have a lot of great habitat for species, helps keep water clean, etc. Species at risk. If there's a species at risk that's known to frequent or breed on a property, then they would be, of course, worth protecting. Our species are declining significantly across the world, and specifically here in Ontario. So as much as we can do to protect their habitat would be great. For example, red sideace is a minnow species that's endangered in Ontario, and locally it's only found in the Two Tree River on St. Joseph Island. So if a property came up along that river, that would be an ecological value for us to protect it. And then scientific use. We're always learning. We always want to learn more about our local ecosystems. So if a property is one that we can potentially get that has, potential for scientific use, then we might consider obtaining it. So community value. We want to, as a charity, we want to make sure that what we're doing benefits the public. And so if we have a property that can be open to the public for hiking trails, that people can use for hiking, snowshoeing, bird watching, botany, anything like that, then that adds a lot of value to the community if we're able to open it up for respectable public access. And scenic views. I'm sure a lot of you have a place that you can picture right now in your mind that you just love when you come around the corner looking at that magnificent view, and you'd probably hate it if something ever happened to that view. So if there's a scenic view that we can protect, then that's a bonus. Location value. So we want to make sure that we are protecting large continuous tracts of land whenever possible. So if there's a property that's beside or close to an existing one of our preserves, then it's beneficial to protect it. We also we operate in a fairly small area and don't have a lot of capacity right now to travel long distances. So we want to make sure that it's not too far away and that we can travel to it successfully. And then access. We need to be able to get to our properties. Karina will explain this a little bit later on, but if there's a property that is accessible year round, that's great. But if it's like a landlocked piece of property where you need to parachute out of a helicopter to get into, that's not very ideal. And then financial considerations. So every property that we acquire comes with a price tag. If it's donated to us, there's still expenses. We have to raise money for our stewardship fund to ensure that we have enough money to take care of it forever. And if we're purchasing a property, we have to have the funds to do that. And we cannot, or we shouldn't pay more than fair market value for a piece of property. So we can't really get into bidding wars and pay too much for a property. And as I said, stewardship costs, each property comes with money, needs to come with money to ensure that we're able to steward the property into the future and forever. So the land conservation process with donations, typically a donor comes to us and says, hey, I have interest in donating my land to you to protect forever. So that's often really exciting when that happens. So what we do is we create a preliminary project summary where we go out to the property and we collect a whole lot of information about it. All those values that I already discussed, the location value, the community value, the biological values, and then, generic information about the property, where it is, how big it is, any risks involved, if it's going to become a liability for the Conservancy to protect, and all of that kind of information. And then our board of directors has a land securement committee. We bring all that information to them, and we discuss if we want to accept the donation or not. Assuming we do, we bring it to the full board for a similar vote. And then if the board is on board with proceeding with the transaction, we proceed with the transaction. And then, of course, once it's done, we send out thank yous and make formal announcements. So I'll talk a bit about all of the properties that we currently protect. There's 12 different ones here, and I'm going to go through each one in detail. So the first one that we acquired was the Dawson Island Preserve. This was donated to the Kensington Conservancy by the Wells family in 2007. It's located at the northeast end of Dawson Island, which is one of two relatively large islands, Dawson Island, Portlock Island, just south of Deborah. The majority of them are crown land, but there are some private lots along the shoreline areas of them. And this property here was the last remaining undeveloped lot on this large stretch of the eastern side of Dawson Island, and the donors wanted to ensure that there was a continuous stretch of undeveloped land, so they donated it to the Conservancy. It's only about 3.5 acres in size, but it ensures that no development will take place there. The next one is the Phelps Preserve. This was donated by the Phelps family also in 2007. This one is located on Campador Island. So again, this is kind of the same idea as Dawson Island Preserve. This was a buildable lot that the donors wanted to ensure this shoreline remained undeveloped. But also Campador Island has large potential for a silica sand extraction, which would decimate a large chunk of the island. And this ensures that we have a say in that should that ever come to fruition. The Archibald Homestead. This was the first property that was purchased by the Kensington Conservancy. You can see here, there's the Dawson Island Preserve. It's right across the way on the mainland. It's off Archibald Road, which you'll see on Highway 17, about halfway between Deborah and Bruce Mines. So the Archibald Homestead, as I said, was the first one that the Kensington Conservancy purchased. It is 170 acres in size. It used to be an operating farm, but in recent times, that wasn't really happening anymore. There was a lot of buildings that were falling apart. There was an old gravel pit that had become a private dump. There were trailers out along the shoreline that were falling apart, abandoned. So it wasn't really an active farm anymore, and there was a lot of problems with the property. So we fundraised and purchased the property. We initially got a loan from the Conservation Fund to buy the property and then fundraised to pay it off. And then the Kensington Conservancy did $65,000 worth of environmental cleanup to take down the old buildings, take all the oil barrels and tires out of the gravel pit. And then through the Trees Canada program, there was about 20,000 trees that were planted in the fields. It may have been nice to keep the fields as active farm fields to keep some meadow habitat, but the fields hadn't been touched in so long that no farmer wanted to continue to farm them. So we decided to plant the trees there instead. And a lot of those trees are doing really well. Some of them, I can't believe how big they've grown in just the last 7 years since I've been with the Conservancy. So it'll be exciting to see what it looks like in the future. Stobie Creek Preserve. So this is the next property that was donated to the Kensington Conservancy, again by the Wells family in 2008. This here is Stobie Creek, which you drive over just north of here, just east of Deborah. It's 85 acres and it contains half of the Stobie Creek wetland, which is one of the two provincially significant wetlands that I mentioned before. The Foster Parkland and Walking Trails. This was donated by Maurice and Janet Foster in 2009. It's their only donation that's come through the Ecological Gifts program, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. It's 40 acres in size, long, narrow property off along Mink Point Road here, just on the outside of Deborah. And if you've hiked our hiking trails, you'll have been on this property before. Black Hole Preserve. This is by far my favorite preserve that the Kensington Conservancy protects. There's a lot of really cool, interesting things in this wetland. It was donated in 2011 by the Porcupine Club. It's 206 acres in total. And this wetland here is part of the Kensington Complex, which is the other provincially significant wetland that I mentioned. I bring people in here all the time. There's always something new to see. It's a fantastic hike. The wetland in the spring is absolutely beautiful. There's beaver dams all over the place, orchids, tons of birds. It's magnificent. If only we could deal with the mosquitoes and black flies, it'd be perfect, but it can be pretty nasty in there for bugs, but that's understandable. It's a wetland. The next one is the Ripple Rock Preserve. This was donated by the Thornton Camp Group in 2012. You'll see here it spans both sides of Highway 17, just west of Deborah. Here's Cass. So when you're coming down this straight stretch just before the curve, you'll probably recognize the wetland on the south side. It's named the Ripple Rock Preserve because just to the west of the boundaries is the Ripple Rock. If you're not familiar with the Ripple Rock, next time you're going by, take a peek. It's this flat rock facing you that has waves for like a ripple effect as fossilized into the rock. It's pretty cool. This little parking lot has a plaque that has a few more details about the history of the Ripple Rock. So definitely check that out if you haven't before. The next one, these are our only two easements, also donated by Thorn Camp. The Hole in the Wall easement and Fishnet Island. Some of you may be familiar with the hole in the walls. This just to the west of Kensington Point Marina is this narrow channel that goes, it's high rock on both sides. It's pretty cool. And then opens up into this this hole within the wall. That's how it's got its name. And it's this really cool area. I definitely recommend boating up there if you haven't before. But we have an easement surrounding the hole in the wall. And in just a few minutes, I'll talk a little bit more about what an easement means, and the same kind of on Fishnet Island here. The Lang Family Preserve, this was donated by Susan Lang and Sheila Radford in 2015. It's 8.7 acres, but you'll see it's a very unique shape. My understanding is that it was designed this way so that if someone wanted to heavily develop the wetland, they would have to cross this property, and then the owners could say, no, you can't do that. So it theoretically protects more than what's actually on the property itself. The Boyer Preserve. This was the second purchase by the Kensington Conservancy back in 2016. We received a $100,000 grant from the Nature Conservancy of Canada to purchase the rest, to go towards the purchase. And then we got a bridge loan from the Conservation Fund. And then thanks to the Pam Bent bequest that we received, we were able to pay it off in full. It's 93 acres. It includes some provincially significant wetland down on the south side, and we built the Kensington Conservation Center in the field at the north end. And then we built hiking trails throughout the property and joined them to the hiking trails that exist on the adjacent Foster Parkland and walking trails. And Karina will talk a little bit more about those trails in a minute. Coatsworth Island Preserve. This was the third and fourth property that we purchased. Technically, Coatsworth Island is two separate lots. We purchased the west half in 2019 with support from the extended Wells family, and then the east half in 2021, thanks to support from the Phelps family. Coatsworth Island was one of the largest remaining undeveloped islands within the St. Joseph Channel, 28.8 acres, and that'll be kept undeveloped forever. And then lastly, the Gravel Point Preserve. This was donated to the Kensington Conservancy by Bill and Betsy Kingery in just April of last year, so less than a year now. So they donated this first lot to us, which they owned, and then the funds to purchase the 3 adjacent lots to it. And special thanks to Jason Schneider, who donated a third of the value of his property towards the project. So this is our first acquisition on St. Joseph Island, and it's our largest one to date. It's 278 acres in total. There's got these really cool wetlands on it, great habitat for large mammals, and we've already built a bit of a hiking trail, 1.5 kilometer loop, and we plan on building more going forward. So those are our nature preserves. That's almost 1,200 acres in total. And to date, we've recorded 1,328 different species on our nature preserves, which is pretty good, I would say. There's still thousands of more species left to find, but a lot of those are obscure insects, which are really hard to find and identify, but we're working towards it. We use iNaturalist to keep track of all of our species. So when we take a picture of a species, we can upload it to this database, and then it keeps track for us. And it does some neat calculations, like it splits it up for each preserves. So you can see the Boyer Preserve has the most species on it, 688. Then the Black Hole, then Gravel Point already has a lot of 425 species, and we've owned it for less than a year. So you can really see how diverse that property is, and then so on and so on. Usually the smaller properties have less, which is as expected. I'm going to pass it over to Corrine here now to talk a little bit about what we do after we acquire a property.
Hi, everyone. I'm Corrine. So yeah, my role at the Kensington Conservancy is the land stewardship coordinator. So I kind of keep an eye on all of the properties, and one of my roles is to monitor the properties. So each one of our properties has to be monitored at minimum once a year. So, you know, the properties that don't get a lot of traffic once a year is usually fine, but like the properties that have hiking trails, like the Foster Parkland and Boyer Preserve and Gravel Point, we tend to monitor them more often just because they have more people walking through, or there might be trees falling down over the trails and things like that. So we monitor for disturbances such as invasive species, fires, flooding, or other natural disturbances, any kind of unauthorized use like camping or ATV use, and any kind of unauthorized resource harvesting. And we're also always looking for new species of flora and fauna to add to our species list. So usually we try to spend a few hours, like if we're only going one time throughout the season, we'll try to spend a few hours there to really get more plants and animals and insects identified while we're there. Oh, I think you might have to switch the slides, Carter. Thanks. So for each of our properties, we have to prepare a baseline documentation report. So these are, actually, the next one. These are reports that are completed when we first acquire a property, and it kind of provides a base overview of everything about the property. So that will include all of the legal documents, all the land title information, everything we might have in our files goes into this report. And then we also put in like a species list. So what we'll go in and look at the property and try to identify as many species as we can, and also take photographs so that we have a nice file on sort of what the condition of the property is like when we first acquired it. Okay, next slide. Yeah, so just going over that again, it's a snapshot in time of the condition. So it'll include the basic property information, like we said, any kind of ecological values. If there's any historic uses, if we know any of the history of the property, we'll put that in there, and any uses that will continue. If we're planning to do any improvements, such as a parking lot or a building, we'll kind of put that in there as well. If there's any potential threats to the property, we will indicate that. And then, yeah, the photographs will kind of give an overview of the property, some of the key areas, if there's a significant wetland or significant trees. If we see any kind of damage or anything like that, we'll make sure we have photographs of it. And we have various types of maps. So we'll have aerial maps and maps indicating kind of where the property is in the broader landscape. And like I said before, all the legal documents pertaining to the property as well. So each of our properties also includes a management plan. So a management plan is required for each property owned by TKC. So again, we start this management plan when we acquire a new property. So it'll include some background information about the Conservancy, all the information about the property acquisition, property description and location maps. So a lot of the similar stuff that's in the baseline documentation report, just kind of, but a bit more minimally. But then the difference is that it includes the management goals and objectives. So, I mean, for most of our properties, our management goals are to leave them as they are and in perpetuity, to keep them, for conservation purposes. But, if there's an improvement that needs to be done, if there's tree planting or some other thing, that will be in the management plan. We'll have a comprehensive species list. And when we monitor the property each year, or anytime we monitor, we fill out a pretty extensive form. So copies of those forms will go into the management plan every time it's monitored. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about our land securement strategy. So the strategy this is sort of like an overview of how we decide on whether to say protect a property, maybe seek out a property to protect, or whether we might accept a donation of a property. So the first land securement strategy was created in 2012, and it identified potential acquisitions with an original area of focus. So I think Carter kind of talked about that before, how the Conservancy was started, and it really focused on properties very close to the Deborah area. And an updated land securement strategy was approved by TKC by the board in July 2019, and that strategy included an expanded area of focus and included both existing and new potential acquisitions. I think there's a map here. Yeah. So initially, most of the properties were centered around Deborah. It was quite a small area. So the board approved to expand kind of a little further west, and then further south, kind of including the southern part of St. Joseph Island. So we're including more the shoreline and some of the uninhabited islands to the west, and then St. Joseph Island. So we've got our Gravel Point Preserve is this down in here. Oh, okay. I'm going to hand it back to Carter.
So I'm just going to quickly talk about some of the tools that we use to acquire land. There's fee simple acquisitions, conservation easement, split receipting, American Friends of Canadian Conservation, the Ecological Gifts Program, and legacy gifts. So first is fee simple. You may not be familiar with this by name, but it's just as if you owned a piece of property or your house, you own it fee simple. It's called. It's the most preferred method of ownership in Canada. It's private. You can, as a landowner, you can do whatever you want within, reason on your property. You can build buildings, you can cut trees, you can make trails, you can do a whole variety of things. And so when we acquire a property via fee simple, this gives us the most control to protect the land in the way that we want to. So if someone donates a property to us, then that's no expense, or if we buy a property, that's a major expense. But one tool that can be used is split receipting, where a landowner can donate a portion of the property to us, or a portion of the value to the property to us, and we purchase the rest, and they would get a charitable tax receipt for that difference in the fair market value and the sale price. And this tax break is often an advantage to offset the difference in the sale price. So the one, if you donate a property to the Kensington Conservancy, if you're a Canadian landowner and you donate your land to us, you would have to pay capital gains on the fair market value of the property as if you sold it, even though the fact that you're donating it to us. So that can also often be a deterrent for people who can't afford to pay that capital gains. So the federal government came out with the Ecological Gifts Program. If you donate it through this program, you can donate a property to a qualified land trust, which we are, and pay zero capital gains. And you also receive a larger tax break for your donation. So let's say a property is worth $100,000 even, and you donate it to the Kensington Conservancy, you would get $100,000 worth of tax breaks that you can use over 10 years to offset your taxes. Just a regular tax receipt for a donation of land, I think you can only use over 5 years, and the value that you'd get on that $100,000 tax receipt would be worth a lot less depending on your tax bracket. So the property does have to be ecologically significant enough to qualify this program, but any property that's, relatively wild and free of disturbances should qualify. So that's the one that we've done in the Foster Parkland and walking trails. If you're an American landowner looking to donate land to the Kensington Conservancy, if you donate it to us outright, again, there may be capital gains to pay, and the tax receipt that you receive from us might not be useful unless you have Canadian income. So the way around that is going through American Friends of Canadian Conservation. They're set up as a charity in the United States, a 501c3, and they've received prescribed donee status through the CRA and the IRS, which allows them to receive a donation of land from the landowner, and then they transfer that land to the Land Trust in Canada. So, and they get the US tax receipt from American Friends as a 501c3. So this can be expensive. There is a fee for doing this, but often it's well worth the American donors getting that tax receipt. And it can take more time and effort to complete than just a regular donation land transfer, but again, might be well worth it. And then conservation easements. So this is different than a regular easement that you might be familiar with. If you, again, you own your own piece of property, you can cut down the trees, you can build buildings, you can make trails, and all that kind of stuff. If you enter a conservation easement agreement with a land trust like us, you can give up your rights to certain activities, like those ones I mentioned. And then that property going forward forever and ever can never have those things happen to them. But you still own the property, you still pay taxes on the property, you can still use the property as you wish, but that ensures that the property is protected forever. So if you sell your property or your children inherit the property, however it gets transferred to somebody else at some point, those rules are still in place and can't be broken. So this is a very useful tool for people who want to conserve their property but don't want to give it up entirely like you would if you donated or sold it to us. And legacy gifts. Some people, they don't want to give up their land during their lifetime, but are more than happy to give it to the Conservancy upon their passing. So that's called a legacy gift if they leave it in their will to us. We can also take land does not have conservation value that then we can sell and use for other conservation projects. So that's a very brief overview of how our land protection works, and everything that goes into it. But that's not what we're all about. We also like to do other conservation projects and education programs within the local community. So we're going to go through a few of them now. The first one is the Stobie Creek Rehabilitation Project. As I mentioned earlier, we own a piece of property at the south end of the Stobie Creek, but the Stobie Creek goes up, flows up from the north for a few kilometers before it gets out into Lake Huron. And it flows through a lot of agricultural land, which over the years has made the creek not as nice as it used to be. Banks eroding, causing a lot of sediment to get into the water. It's not as clear as it used to be. Cattle have got into the creek. They go to the washroom in the creek, they get stuck in the creek. That's not good for the ecology of the creek. So we decided to see if we could do something about that. So we received funding from the Ontario Trillium Foundation to do a study about what needed to be done. And one of those things was get the cows out of the creek. So we worked with a local landowner who owned a portion of the creek, and with some of that grant money, we got fencing installed along both edges of the creek, all the way from Highway 17 south to where our property starts. So this is what it looks like. Well, this is when the fence got first built. There's now nice fences all the way along, keeping the cows out of the creek. One issue, though, is that that's what the farmer relied upon for his cows to get water during the summer. So what we did was we installed nose pumps. The idea is that cow pushes on this pump to push it out of the way to get the water out of the trough, and that in turn pumps more water up from the creek through the hose into the trough for them to drink. There's no motor, no batteries, nothing. It's all just that classic pump action that draws the water in. So, and it was really quite cool to see the cows use it. Once one cow figures it out, then all of them followed suit, and they were able to get water out of the creek without actually going in the creek. We planted a whole bunch of trees within the riparian zone to hopefully get some stabilization once the roots grow. And we're actually doing some more planting this upcoming spring. For the last few years, COVID hasn't allowed us to do any planting, but this year we're going to get some school groups out, and we'll be looking for volunteers from the public as well, if anyone's interested. And I'm going to pass it back over to Corinne to talk about a few more things.
Okay, so I'm just gonna do a little overview of our hiking trails. So yeah, Carter mentioned that we have hiking trails on our Foster Parkland and Walking Trails Preserve and the Boyer Preserve. So that's where these hiking trails are. They were started on the one side and then expanded to include the Boyer Preserve. So here is the Kensington Conservation Center, this little green building here, and there's parking lot. And so there's 2 loops that you can do. Each loop is about 2-ish kilometers. So if you do the whole loop, it's about a 4-kilometer long trail. It's quite lovely. It's a lot of up and down, so not totally flat. So it's a nice little workout, and it goes along the shoreline down on the south end. It's quite beautiful, and there's really nice wetlands. So sometimes you can see a lot of shorebirds down in that area. And waterfowl. We'll go to the next one. Okay, so now we have, so our new hiking trails are at our new preserve in Gravel Point. So far we managed to put in a 1.5-kilometer loop that you can see here. That's just up in the northwest end of the preserve. We were really lucky to have an amazing volunteer this summer, Dave Moole, who helped to basically design and started clearing the whole trail. And then, you know, he decided he should probably have some help. So we organized a trail clearing bee and managed to get that loop done by kind of mid-fall. And yeah, so people have been using it a lot and have been snowshoeing it this winter. And we've got the parking lot in. It's about right now, probably about 4 cars in the wintertime and 5 to 6 in the summertime. So one of the projects we did last year is we got funding from the Invasive Species Center to construct 2 boot brush stations to keep at the trailhead of each of the hiking trails. So these are all ready to go. I've got this is the sign pictured here that's going to go on them, and they're going to look like what you see on the right here. So we'll be actually installing them this spring at the trailhead. So the purpose of these is, you know, to clean your boots off, get the mud off, get any seeds or anything that might be stuck in the grips of your boots, so that you're not spreading any plants or seeds or anything like that, and hopefully no invasive species spread. So we're very happy to have those installed this spring. Go to the next one. Okay, so our other project that we have going on that we started last year is our water quality monitoring program. So we got these water testing kits that you can see up in the right-hand corner. And they're just nice, small, compact test kits. So we put out a call for volunteers that wanted to do some water quality monitoring. And we sent out these test kits with them, and they did some water sampling for us. So we had sites all over the St. Joseph Channel area, some local lakes, rivers, and some small creeks. And the reason why we decided to do this is it's really important to have some idea of the overall quality of the water, and it's an indication of the ecosystem health in the area. And we know our water here is used pretty extensively for recreation. So lots of people in boats and swimming and things like that. So it's good to be testing the water, keep an eye on if there's any changes, any potential health risks, keep an eye out for algae blooms, changes in temperature, changes in turbidity, see if there's any invasive species showing up. The other thing is, in this area, there's very little water quality information available. So that's why we thought it'd be a good idea to take on this community science program so we could start filling in some of those data gaps. So some of the measurements that we took with this program were air temperature, water temperature, conductivity, chlorine levels, pH, alkalinity, hardness, and clarity. So all the data that we collect from this goes into a website held by it's called an organization called the Water Rangers. And then in turn, all of that information goes to a larger database called the Great Lakes Data Stream. So we received funding for this program actually from Lake Huron North, which is a new organization that's a collaborative of different organizations in the area that are working on freshwater projects. So the Kensington Conservancy is one of the collaborators of Lake Huron North. So just a brief little summary of what we did this year. We sent out 12 test kits. So 10 of them were owned by TKC and 2 of them we had borrowed from Lake Huron North. And altogether we had 79 tests completed at 26 locations. And there's a little map there that shows quite the broad area that we had test sites. So it doesn't show all individual because some of them are lumped together there in the map, but we had a lot in the Lake Huron in the St. Joseph Channel, but also you can see there was a lot at some inland lakes and some smaller creeks, rivers. And overall, we had 33 youth engaged. We had the 4-H club on St. Joseph Island that were involved with this and doing testing every month at the Women's Institute Park in Richards Landing. And we had a class at the grade 10 class at Cass that tested water at Sucker Creek there by Cass High School. So one of our other monitoring programs is we've been trying to detect whether we have bats on our preserves. So Carter and I were just having a discussion last year and kind of looking on iNaturalist to see if there's any bat observations, and we realized, well, there's only about 10 observations in all of the whole Algoma area. So we thought, wouldn't that be neat to find out if we had bats? And so we got some funding to purchase these bat monitors, which you can see on the right there. So those are called passive acoustic bat monitors. So they just sit on a tree and they record every night, and then you come back every month and take the data out of it and see what you get. And there's also active acoustic monitoring, which is there. I have a little device hooked into a phone, and it'll detect if a bat is flying over. So you sit out in the evening and see if a bat's flying over, and it'll record it as it flies over and identify what species it is. So this is a great program to, engage the community in getting interested in bats and submit any kind of bat sightings. We did have a few people email in or call in to say they were bats at their place. Also, we're looking for people to let us know if they have bats roosting at their house or get interested in installing bat houses. We've been directing people where to find bat houses or how to build them themselves, and kind of how to install and locate them in the right places so that bats will use them. So next slide. So here is just a little summary of what we found from our monitoring last year. So we put out 10 of those stationary monitors on 8 of our preserves, and we did detect 5 of the 8 Ontario bat species on each of the preserves. And we did detect the endangered little brown bat on all 8 of the preserves where we had bat monitors out. So that was quite exciting to know. And the most often detected bats were the silver-haired bat and the hoary bat. So this project, we got funding for the bat monitors through the TD Friends of the Environment Foundation, which funded 2 of the monitors, 2 of the stationary monitors, and 1 of the handheld monitors. And we also had funding from Evolution to purchase the remaining bat monitors. We also had a donation of 4 very large bat houses from Capstone Infrastructure, which is a wind farm north of Sault Ste. Marie. So we're very happy to have received that very generous funding, and we're going to be continuing that program this summer. So the other monitoring program we have on the preserves is we call it trail camera trapping. So we have 18 trail cameras set up on our preserves. So 10 of those cameras are targeting wolf or coyote travel corridors. We got funding from Evolution again to support that program. So we purchased 10 cameras with that kind of objective in mind. And we're working in partnership with the Algoma Highlands Conservancy with their wolf project. They identified a gap in the Deborah kind of St. Joseph Island area that they didn't have any observations of wolves in this area. So they have quite a large program at the Conservancy there, which is north of Sault Ste. Marie. And they also have another study site around Iron Bridge. So they're happy to assist us with getting these cameras set up in our location. We haven't found any wolves yet, but I just got the camera set up in kind of by the end of December, got them all set up. So we're fingers crossed we'll capture something over the next few months. So we also have 4 cameras where we received funding from Lake Huron North. And those are targeting kind of shoreline areas or wetlands. So I've got those set up like on our Boyer Preserve along our shoreline, in the Black Hole Preserve at the wetland, and some other locations. Then we also had 4 additional cameras that we owned before. So those are set up on our other preserves, and we're happy with anything that they pick up. But as you can see by the pictures I have here, just a selection. We've seen black bears, coyotes, moose, lots and lots of deer on all of our preserves. So anytime I bring back an SD card from one of the cameras, I upload everything onto iNaturalist. So that's where we keep all of our data from this house right now. And the other thing that we do every year is the Christmas bird count. And thanks to Carter, our very avid birder, he organizes a lot of this. So this is an activity that started way back when in like 1900. It's one of the oldest, longest running citizen science programs in North America. So these counts happen in over 2,000 locations, and the information is all gathered by volunteer participants. It's quite a large data set, and it's quite interesting, and the information is used by biologists and naturalists to look at population trends and distributions of birds. So this is usually held in the Deborah area. Usually it's like the week after Christmas, usually like Boxing Day or or the day after. A lot of birders come out and spend the day looking. If you're looking for more information, I believe Carter is going to be talking about the results of that maybe in one of our future webinars. So one of our other activities that we do in the summer is we have a week-long summer day camp. So this is geared towards kids 8 to 12, and it's held at the St. Joseph Island Hunters and Anglers Association. Usually it's in the first few weeks of July, sometime one week in there. We haven't decided on a week just yet, but we should be hopefully finding that out soon for this year. But we do all kinds of fun activities, including archery, canoeing, photography, building shelters in the woods, all kinds of fun activities for the kids, and we always have a great turnout. And the other program we have that runs through the summer is our Junior Explorer program. And this is an environmental and education program for children ages 5 to 10 and their families. So with this program, we meet 2 days a week for a few hours in July and August. So it's not a full day, it's just for 2 to 3 hours in the morning usually. And we'll have different activities every week. Here you can see last year we planted a pollinator garden. That's right next to the office actually. And we had a day where Rob Rutledge from Sioux College came and taught the kids all about different wildlife species, and he brought his telemetry equipment and showed them how to track, how biologists track wildlife with telemetry. So they quite like that. And we also did some painting of rocks and planting flowers. So there's just a few activities that we do, and we're always trying to come up with some new things. And lastly, we're always looking for volunteers to help us with our various activities. So one thing is I will be looking for somebody to help, or some people to help install those boot brush stations. This spring, I have all the lumber. It's just a matter of a little bit of carpentry, know how to put it all together and get them in the ground. Usually in the spring, we organize an Adopt a Highway cleanup. So we have an Adopt a Highway section of highway from Smith Road to about to the high school, to Cass. So we try to book like a day or half day to go clean up that portion of highway. I'm always looking for people to help with monitoring the trail cameras, so changing batteries, changing SD cards, even going through the photos. Be looking for volunteers to help with water quality monitoring. So we did get funding for another 5 kits. So I have 15 testing kits for this year. So I'll be looking for, I think a lot of my volunteers are going to come back from last year, but I'll have a few more openings for this year. Another monitoring program we do is we have bluebird boxes set up on quite a few fields, and I myself or other volunteers go through and monitor them during the nesting season. So they get monitored at least once a week and check for nesting activity. Also, we'll be looking to expand our gravel point hiking trail. So we will be looking for help with that trail clearing and just general maintenance as well with any of our other trails. And if anyone would be interested in property monitoring and how we do that and would be interested in helping with that, would be great. And one other thing we were just talking about is trying to get out to more public events. We'd love to have more volunteers to help represent the Conservancy at some of those events, because sometimes it feels like me and Carter can't be everywhere. So it'd be great to have new volunteers to help with that. And I think that's everything for me. I'm on the last slide here. So thank you very much for coming out tonight and listening to our webinar.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Here's our contact information if you want to follow up with us on anything. And our website should be easy to find, kensingtonconservancy.org, which has a lot of the information that we talked about tonight. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen here, and feel free to unmute yourself, turn your video on, and if you have any questions to ask, or add them in the chat. One question we received in the chat already is, have you ever received or solicited financial donations from well-known foundations? I don't think so, any that you might consider a well-known foundation. However, we are just starting to explore that idea. We've subscribed to a service that helps us find grants like that from foundations. So maybe I'll be able to say yes to that in the not too distant future. Any other questions, comments? Well, I'm not seeing any. So thanks again for coming tonight. We really appreciate it. We're not quite sure yet what our February webinar is going to be yet, but we do plan on announcing that by the end of the day tomorrow with our usual February 1st events email. So we'll have, if you're interested in our webinar, stay tuned for that email tomorrow and you'll find out what it's going to be. So with that, thanks again for coming and have a good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Okay, everybody's gone.
That was good.